here's the agenda today. So we're going to start with an introduction, and we're going to look at adding conditions and logic, then move on to insight narratives, customizing insight narratives, and the demo, and then some questions afterwards. So QuickSight is a powerful business intelligence tool. So it can be used to create valuable insights into a wide variety of data sets, allowing people to see, interpret, and ask questions of that data as well. So QuickSight enables authors to quickly create impactful visuals using common formats like bar graphs and line graphs, pie charts, or my personal favorite, the Sankey diagram. And these allow authors to present the data in multiple ways. These charts and visuals can be dynamic and interactive. They allow the viewer to investigate the data and look for trends and patterns, but sometimes there is the need for a dashboard to tell a story or a narrative from the source data, or perhaps it needs to be a little bit more prescriptive in the information or guidance that it's presenting, depending maybe on who's viewing the dashboard or the data that's being presented. QuickSight includes features such as adding logic to manipulate data and create the right visuals or information for their dashboard. And calculated fields are one way to use conditions, calculations, or logic to get the results you need that perhaps aren't immediately available in the underlying data set. For example, you can truncate a time period, employ numerical functions like rounding, or add your own metric comparison logic using common operators. But there is another feature that empowers authors to use computations or custom conditions to display specific information depending on the data or selections that are made. And these can be used to present different guidance or insights dynamically based on computations and if statements. So I'm talking about insight narratives, of course. And as we'll see in the demo, if you select an existing visual and then click the suggested insight light bulb icon, like you can see on the screen there, and then click add auto narratives. You can add auto narratives that show convenient text-based information based on computations, such as top movers, period over period, or bottom ranked, and we're going to see some of these today. So these are awesome narratives in themselves, and they can be really add some flair and some additional text-based information over and above bar charts and the standard visuals. But they may not quite fit your needs out of the box. So if you use the on visual menu button and then select customize narrative, you can see and edit the logic that insight is using using the built-in editor like this. Don't worry too much about what's on the screen here, because we're going to step through that later on during the demo. But my first tip for you today is to do what I've just done there and create a whole bunch of different suggested insights using different computations, and then go and customize them so that you can see how it's constructed, the logic that it's using, what's possible, and then you can go beyond what's shown in the Amazon docs, the customizing narratives walkthrough. So for today's demo, I'll step through the auto narrative logic as a first step, as we just saw, and then we'll implement a custom narrative from scratch, showing some examples of what can be achieved to allow you to take your dashboards to the next level. To do that, you'll go to your analysis, click on the visuals pane, and then add an insight type visual. From there, you can then customize the narrative either through the on visual menu like we just saw, or through the big blue customize button itself. So let's get started with the demo. Okay, so you should be able to see there our analysis that we're going to be using. Let me just see if I can turn off my video. No, it's fine, we'll leave it running. Okay, so you can see on screen here, you can see this is actually using the sample data set. That's the, when you first start a QuickSight account, you get sample data, you get sample analyses and some sample data sets. So if you want to follow along, if you're watching this video later, you can follow along, you have access to exactly the same sample data. So I've created an analysis here, and it has the sort of standard visuals that we've talked about, donut charts, some pivot tables, and some trends and forecasts, etc. And these are some of those insight narratives that we saw. But let's say that you want to have that more prescriptive guidance that we mentioned. So I've got another tab here that we're going to be using today. So, okay, perfect. I hope you can see my sales dashboard here. Okay, so we've got on screen here. So I'm just going to walk you through the visuals that I've got. So first off, I've just got a title bar here, which is just a text box. I brought in an image, and then I've got two main visuals here. So what are these based on? So if this one here is a pivot table, okay, and it's got some fields selected here, but what I want to show you is that I've added a filter first of all. Now this filter is filtering based on the bottom 5 entries. So this is sales data. We've got the bottom 5 contacts, sales contacts for our sales colleague that's just landed on their dashboard, okay? And we're going to be using those bottom ranked contacts as a way to manipulate some of our dynamic guidance through the custom narrative. We'll come back to this in a moment. Now this one here, this is my second tip for you today. So as a QuickSight author, quite often you might be using a common data set. You might not be familiar with the underlying data set or queries that's used to build it. So it's really useful just to get a table and add all of the fields to that table so you can get familiar with the data structure. And it can also be useful for debugging your dynamic content as well. And we'll be using this in a moment so you can see how I would use that. So first of all, we talked about auto narratives. So these are generated. So we click an existing visual, we click our little icon, our little light bulb icon, and add a suggested insight. This has created a visual down here for me. And the default there is bottom ranked computation. So we'll go with that. Now it's quite correctly said there you need to add some fields because it needs some data. So we're going to add, first off, it needs a time dimension. So we're going to add the order date. It then needs a metric value. So we're going to add some profit in there. And then let's use the customer name as our category. And it should build out. There we go. So let's make it a more sensible size for our use. There we go. Nice little auto narrative. But how does it create this? How does it come up with that display? So let's take a look then. So we saw earlier that you can use the on visual menu and go to customize narrative. Now this is the built-in editor, okay, browser-based built-in editor. This is the IDE effectively that we're going to be using for most of today. So it's split into 3 panes. So we have the editor pane in the middle here. We've got the function pane, and then we have the preview pane down here so we can see the effects of our logic. Now up here we have a little edit narrative button, and if we press the blue information icon there, we are able to see the documentation, which is really useful, and we'll be using this in a moment as well. So I said I would step through the logic here, so let's do that. So first of all, we have some static. This is just some static text. It won't change based on any data criteria. You can see there that it's just updated the preview down here, and it always refreshes. This preview refreshes after a period. So what do we have here? So we have the static text, then we have 3. So where's that coming from? Well, we have our first expression editor widget, and this is an inline if. So what's it saying? Well, if you're familiar with programming paradigm, this is called the dot notation. So we have bottom dot items count. So if, and it's referring to these computations. So if bottom dot items count is greater than 1, then, which it is, then show that items count, which is 3. So bottom items count. The next field is the field name, which is here. Let me show you the outputs to that computation. That might help to explain where these are coming from. So I'll go back to the documentation. When I go to computations, we're using bottom ranked, aren't we? So The computation takes these parameters, which we'll see in a moment, but these are the outputs of that computation. So the category field, name, the metric field, items count, etc. And that's what we're talking about here. So category field, which is customer, and then we've got static text for total. Profit is the metric field. And then here, this is just for some correct grammar. So if plural, say are, if singular, say is. Now next, we've got a block 4. So this is our first block 4 that we've come across. So this is saying for items in bottom, do this. So for each item, it's just got the category value followed by the metric value. And that's how it's creating this display here. Okay. So let's close out this because we don't want to deal with auto narratives today. We want to add our own narrative. So as I said, add visual, add insight. Now we want our dynamic content to take center stage. So I'm going to move it up towards the middle of our screen. I'm going to expand it to really fill the field of view primarily. Okay. So the first thing I'm going to do is add some data. So I'm going to add some fields to this. So I'm going to add the date component, which is order date, like we saw earlier. I'm going to add a value of profit. I'm also going to add date key, and we'll talk about this in a moment. I'm going to change that to maximum, and you'll see why later. And then I'm also going to add, of course, the string data type, which is the contact name. Okay. So that date max key here. So let's look at our debug table or our data table. So we can see here, I've already added the order date, which is here. But this sample data includes this, which is basically an array of digits, which represents the date. So year, month, day. So 2020, 0409, 2020, month 4, day 9. Okay. And that's going to be useful for our dashboard today. Okay, next, I'm actually going to format this visual, and I'm going to give it a more useful title for me. So I'm going to call this guidance narrative. Now, I don't want that title to appear on the screen, so I'm going to hide it, but you'll see why I did that in a moment. So I said earlier, we've got our pivot table at the top. So as I said, we're creating some prescriptive guidance dashboard here. So we want our sales colleague to log on to the dashboard. And at the top here, we've got a campaign. So we want to campaign to focus on some contacts that we want to re-engage and sort of generate more sales from. So these are the bottom ranked of those contacts. What I'm going to do here is I'm going to click the menu and add an action. The action is going to be, you can call it something useful. So it's going to be to filter narrative. I want it to be activated on selection, not menu. So when they select one of these contacts, and I want it to filter. Okay. Now I want it to filter the contact name. Now in reality, you would use something more like a unique ID probably, but for our purposes, we're just going to filter by contact name today. Now the visual that I want it to filter is our guidance narrative. So that's that custom title that I just gave it. So even this little picture is classed as a visual. So when you're building out a fully fledged dashboard, you can have a lot of visuals. So it can be useful to create titles that are useful for the author and for other authors that then use your dashboard later on. So I'm going to save that and let me just double check that I've done that correctly. So it's going to filter by selection, filter contact name to our target guidance narrative. That means that the user can select a contact and get some guidance. Okay, so let's go ahead and edit. I can either use this customize button or I can use this customize narrative here. So we have the same editor that we saw earlier. Okay, and this is exactly the same as you get for those calculated fields, or it's very similar to those calculated fields. So the first thing I'm going to do then is I'm going to add our computations that we're going to be working with. So I'm going to add computation. I am going to add bottom ranked. And I'm going to give it a useful name. So bottom contact by profit. So these are the parameters. So contact. So bottom ranked contact by profit, and that's sum. Now it's got the number of results here as 3, so the bottom 3. For our purposes, it's not that important today, so I'm just going to leave the default. Okay, and you can look here when I go back to the documentation. The outputs, as we saw earlier, are these outputs here. So if I go into the computation, these are those outputs that we're talking about, and that's what we're going to be using a lot in our dashboard today. I'm going to add another computation. This time it's going to be for unique names. So unique values, because we saw in that underlying data set that there's multiple contact names because they've placed multiple orders. Okay, I'm going to call this unique names, and it's going to be those contact names, and we'll be using that shortly. Okay, and then for my last computation, I'm going to add a maximum, and that's by order date. So I'm going to call this order date max, and I'm going to use that date key for the order. Okay, so now we've got our 3 functions, our 3 computations, apologies. Right, now let's actually start adding some detail. So I'm going to put a nice big friendly welcome up here. Let's make it a large header. I'm going to leave it. I'm going to leave it black for the time being. But what I will do is I'm going to press enter, and I'm going to add some blank lines, and you'll see why shortly. But I'm going to add a few blank lines here, and this enables me to drop in some of those conditions and move around within this editor field, and you'll see why that becomes important as we go through. Now I'm going to save this right now. Okay, so we can see what we've produced. Not a lot at the moment. What I do want to do though is when our sales colleague first lands on their dashboard, we want to prompt them to do something. It says up here, please select contact, but that's not particularly especially useful or visible. So let's add our first condition. So I want to go to the bottom to add, like in programming, you would add sort of some error handling, a try catch, or we kind of want to put in some handling for the situation where our sales colleague hasn't selected anyone yet. So we're going to add a straightforward inline if statement. So this here has created an expression widget, and this is our widget editor or expression editor. And I'm going to add in the computation that we've just created, which is unique names. And it's quite simply the count of unique names. And I want to make sure that if it is over 1, which means that our selection hasn't been filtered yet, then we're going to give them a prompt. We can see our preview update, but the prompt is going to be, hey, please select a contact above. And I'm going to make it a little bit more attention grabbing. Just going to change the color there. And we should see what that looks like down here. There we go. So we've added our first condition. It's saying, hey, there's a prompt, please select a contact. So now when I left click a contact, that condition is no longer met. So that dynamic content, that prompt disappears. Okay, let's go back and do something a little bit more useful. Okay, so we're going to add, by the way, I mentioned about my cursor here, and I've taken away one of those lines by adding our inline if. I want to add some more, so I'm going to just add another line in there before I add my if statement, and then I'll clear these up later. So we're going to put in our first block if, okay? Now the condition, we've first off have an inline if for when there's no one selected. We need the opposite now. So when the number of unique names does equal 1, then we want to display something. Here we go. Okay, what I'm going to do now is when you're in this widget, this expression widget, or this block if statement, if I press enter now, it's going to go outside of that that widget, and it's going to start adding lines down here. If you're in that position, it can be difficult to get back in. So if you place your cursor immediately below the widget and then press left arrow, then you're back in the game. But you need to press shift and enter to add lines within that block, okay? So shift and enter. Okay, so the first thing I'm going to do here then is I'm going to say, hey, let's take a look at our selection. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to bring in one of our, I'm going to draw in the value of one of those fields that we added to this narrative. So let's take a look at, and I want to go now to our contact by profit items and expand that here. And I'm looking for the category value and then the value, and that should bring in the contact name, but there's an error. You can see here, it will indicate where the error is, and it will give us some feedback. The error is index. Now, because there's not a for, there's no local variable here, which is what the index is catering for. We're going to manually enter 0, and you'll see me do that quite a few times today, because we want the first entry here. So I've added 0. It now should give us the contact name. So let's take a look at Brian Dickens, which is the contact we've selected. Okay, I'm going to actually make this a large paragraph, make it a bit more attractive, and let's make his name bold, and then I'm going to make this a large paragraph as well and change the color there. Okay, so now we're starting to build out some dynamic content, and it's pulling in some of those values, which is, you can see here, I've highlighted Brian Dickens. It's coming up here. If we deselect Brian, it's going to prompt us to select somebody. Okay, so we're starting to get somewhere. Let's go back in. Okay, we're going to do a bit more in terms of functionality here. So what I want to do right now is I'm going to actually add an expression, and I want to use the functions this time, the functions. So in order to do that, this editor for custom narratives doesn't give me any immediate syntax. But when we went to that little I earlier, we went to the documentation. The syntax is the same for what we talked about earlier, which is calculated fields. So we go to preparing data, adding calculations, functions, click on functions. And what I'm looking for here is to split a string. And we can see the syntax here is split, expression, delimiter, and position. So I want to split, and the expression is actually a computation, which is the category value. Syntax was split expression. Our delimiter in this instance is a blank space or white space. And I want, it doesn't start with 0, unfortunately. I want the first position, which is the first name. And that should bring in, oh, there we go. Got to manually add or remove the local variable, add the 0. I said we'd be doing that a few times. Brian, there we go. So I've split this computation, which is a string, and I've extracted the first value from that string. So Brian, last ordered from us on, and this time I'm going to add another expression, but it's going to be the most recent date. Okay, so time value and then formatted value rather than the raw value. And that should give us a nice formatted value, August 27th. Okay, let's save that. It's worth saving regularly to avoid errors. Okay, and then we're going to give some, remember Shift and Enter, going to give some, actually let's add in here, so total profit made from selling to this contact equals, and then we're going to add a different value from our profit by contact. This time we're going to get the metric value. I'm going to use the formatted value because it's more human readable. There we go. Change the local variable to 0. There we go. So now we've also know how much we've made from this contact so far. And let's give some, let's say, see below for some guidance. And let's say, so we're going to say that we've got some internal wikis. So we're going to say internal.sales wiki, and then maybe these are some generic guides. So guide 1. And we're actually going to add a couple more as well. Cool. Okay, so we're starting to build out our content. We've got some generic guidance here for each contact. But we're going to make a bit more use of this information. So I said earlier I was going to add some lines. So let's start adding some additional blocks here. So I'm going to add a block if statement. And this time I want to know if the profit that we've made. So if the metric value, remember to replace the index array indicator. So if the metric value is, let's say the profit is, I don't know, greater than £1,000, sorry, less than £1,000, we're going to be a little bit mean, and we're going to say, we're going to class these as a low value customer guidance goes here. Going to add another if block, same details. This time we want to say that if the profit made from them is greater than 1,000, that's our threshold, we're going to very bluntly say that these are high value customer guidance goes here. Let's save that now. Okay, so we're pulling in some information from these fields based on the selection above. We can see here that this person, Andrea, is above our threshold. So Andrea is a high value customer and Brian is a low value customer. And we're pulling through the information around their last order and their total profit, which is coming from the records here. But let's make, let's add to the guidance to our content here, because at the moment it's a little bit bland. So now I'm no salesperson, clearly. So I went to our friends over at Amazon and got some sales guides just to use as some example text here. And they had a PDF and some images that I'm going to steal. Okay, so let's go. So our low value guidance goes here. And I'm going to add a title as well. And I'm actually going to add an image as well. Now, what I want to draw your attention to, though, is images are they need to be accessible to the end user's browser. So it's no good having a private image or an image on the private S3 bucket. It needs to either be public facing or accessible at least on the intranet. So I'm going to add an image from our sales guide that we saw a moment ago, and I'm going to just use, I'm going to copy the image link and I'm going to add it in here at the URL and save. Woefully massive. Let's make that more useful. Just adjust the size. Okay, we're starting to get some more sort of slightly professional looking guidance and content here. I'm sure you guys can do much better than me. And then I'm going to just add some sort of some informational text here, because what I want to do is to tell our sales colleague that, hey, because this is checking that it's a low value customer, we're going to direct them to, let's say, the internal sales wiki / I don't know, campaigns, low value customer guidance, and let's say and the tips below. All right, so we're starting to develop some dynamic content here now. So now that we've selected our low value customer, we get some guidance here, some help, to help our sales colleagues, some links to some campaigns, some internal wiki guidance specific to this this profit value here. And when I click on Andrea, she's over our threshold, so she has the high value guidance. So I've already added the high value guidance in this one. And we can see here when we select Andrea, we've got some different guidance, so some different images, some different some guidance for our sales colleague, a high value internal wiki instead, versus clicking on Brian, who's a low value customer, and he has different dynamic content. So what does that look like? Well, let's publish that then. So we can see we're going to publish those two sheets. Here we go then. This is what it looks like for our colleagues. So they land on our page. That's the overview tab that we saw with the charts. This is our prescriptive guidance here. They can see their contacts that they deal with, straight away their bottom ranked contacts. So this is who we want them to engage in our re-engage campaign for 2024, whatever that means. And then they're able to select each contact, get some information and get some relevant guidance for that specific contact. You could even include dynamic URLs to perhaps a content, a CRM, a relationship management system or something like that. But here you can see we've got different guidance based on our selection here. So that's it. Hopefully that's been useful. I'm really looking forward to seeing much better content generated by you folks. And I'm looking forward to seeing what you guys can come up with that sort of more dynamic, but more prescriptive guidance using custom narratives.